Hey, folks, good evening, and welcome to Phantoms and Monsters Radio, where the veil between the known and the unknown is lifted one story at a time. I welcome you and all listeners to the channel, as well as first timers in the chat. I hope you find tonight's subject and reports interesting. So, tonight we're heading deep into the woods to confront the terrifying unknown. From the mystical forest of Mount Shasta to the shadowed trails of Michigan and the haunted hollows of Pennsylvania, tonight's presentation dives into chilling firsthand accounts from campers who encountered entities that defy explanation. Whether it's winged humanoids, black-eyed beings, alien-like figures, or primal cryptid canines, these witnesses came face to face with the bizarre and lived to tell the tale. We'll explore a horrifying brush with a Michigan Dogman at a winter youth camp, an unsettling humanoid presence at Spruce Knob in West Virginia, and a skeletal beast stalking the woods of Devon, UK. You'll also hear about the encounters with feral women, black-eyed strangers, and possible Sasquatch or Dogman-type creatures from Dead Woman's Hollow in Pennsylvania, one of the most paranormally charged sites in the eastern United States. These are the stories that unfold under canvas, by campfire in the dead of night, when nature itself seems to take a step back and something else steps in. Tune in, share your thoughts in the live chat, prepare yourself for a deep journey into the dark wilderness of the unexplained. So before I go any further, I want to mention that this channel is made possible by you clicking on the subscribe and like buttons and by sharing our programming. If you're watching us on YouTube, super chat and super thanks donations are truly appreciated. And if you click the dollar icon located below the chat box, other donation links are also shown in the description. Thanks for your consideration. Now, your comments are always welcome. Tell me which accounts you found interesting in the presentation or suggestions for upcoming shows. I want to thank our chat moderators, Bernadette, Marla, Mike, and Thomas. Also want to thank Kevin and Mary at ESP. Now, if you're in the chat and you have a question, please use all caps, and I'll try to get to each one after the presentation. So the first witness contacts me and asks, or states, something is haunting the woods of Mount Shasta, California. I don't know what it is, but I think I've seen it twice. Before I moved to Mount Shasta, I had heard all the strange stories about the area, including weird disappearances, underground alien bases, and UFO sightings. But I didn't take them seriously. I was living in the suburbs, which was as far away from anything strange as anybody can get. It's just not something you go around thinking about all the time. Now, I lived in Mount Shasta for a couple years before I saw anything like the kind of stories people were telling me. Almost everyone you meet will talk about something they've seen after you get to know them. Now, a couple miles from the town is Lake Siskiyou. There are miles of trails and shoreline to hike along and swim, surrounded by hills and forest. I hope what I'm about to admit doesn't make me sound less believable, but I've used marijuana occasionally since high school and at the time this happened. I was using it medicinally to help with some medical issues. It's illegal in California, not a big deal. Most people are okay about it. To make a long story short, I wanted to grow a couple of plants of my own. So I bought some seedlings and went searching around in some areas in the woods or the forest in the back of Lake Siskiyou, where a series of creeks flowed into it. I was trying to find a place near a water source where I could plant some seeds and had a lot of shrubbery and tree cover so the plants would be hidden. This wasn't a big operation. I just wanted a few plants for my use. We were renting a place and I didn't have any property to grow on, so it seemed like a harmless thing to do. Now, you can understand it's partly because of this that I'm being very careful about remaining unknown. Technically, I could get in some trouble for this. It was getting near the end of summer when a friend and I camped out in the woods behind the lake. Before dark, we took the trail to the north shore of the lake and walked up into the forest where we set up a tent in a wooded area close to where my plants were growing. We were trying to be very quiet and didn't use any lights because it's illegal to camp here overnight. It was around midnight when we decided to go to the lake's north shore for a swim because it was too hot to fall asleep. We were walking on the trail back to the lake, and it was dark and felt humid. Now, as we continued down the path, we passed through a grassy area, and there was a mist hanging over the area at about 3 or 4 foot off the ground. But just this one area, nowhere else. I remember my friend saying something about it because it seemed so unusual to her. A little further ahead, something crashed high up in the trees above us. We were both startled by the sound of branches splitting and breaking. Whatever it was made quite a bit of noise, like something scrambling to hide. It scared the hell out of both of us. When I turned around and looked up, I saw two large, glowing yellow eyes looking down from high up in the tree, but the rest of its form was hidden in the branches. It only looked down for a moment and must have turned away because its shining eyes were gone a moment later. When there was another crashing in the limbs, like something suddenly jumping or falling, breaking more branches, but nothing hit the ground. My friend wasn't looking up when this happened, and she looked directly behind us, and she heard it and turned around. As the second crash happened, the tree limbs high up shook, causing broken branches and limbs to fall. But nothing large like an animal hit the ground, only falling debris. It freaked us out. We both ran and got out of there. After we were further down the trail, I told her it was probably a bear or mountain lion climbing up a tree, and we must have scared it. But I couldn't forget how large its eyes must have been for me to have been able to see that and then shining so brightly from high up in that tree. And the weird mist, that was only in the grassy area. It bothered me, but I didn't say anything more about it because I didn't want to freak my friend out for the rest of the night. It was probably about an hour after we went swimming on the North Shore that we saw something again. Now, we were both sitting on the sand having a smoke, and from behind us, we both heard a sound like a huge wings flapping. We both turned around at the same time and saw this large black bat-like form soaring directly over us, flying at about the same height as the tallest trees. It crossed over the lake and then veered off toward the south, where it disappeared. The creature looked like a flying humanoid with bat-like wings about the size of a tall man. It was far too big to be any kind of owl or bird, and we were both so freaked out that we didn't go back into the woods that night. We just went back to the main campground next to the lake, got in our car, and drove home. I returned the next day with a friend to get our tent we had left. My girlfriend didn't want to go back there. I looked around the area to see if there were any tracks or something, remembering that someone had told me that a long time ago there were reports in the local newspaper of a three-toed tracks up on Mount Shasta. But I couldn't find anything that looked out of the ordinary, and I've never seen anything like that since. But we don't go camping up in the remote places around the mountain anymore. I never knew how widespread the sightings of these flying creatures were until after this happened to me, and I started researching it online. That's how I found out that there's some strange truth to the strange things people claim to see around Mount Shasta. Now, this next witness states, this happened to me in 2018 at a sleepaway camp, and it was still sending shivers down my spine. I've always had a passion for the supernatural and the idea of cryptids roaming the forest, but I've always kept my guard up since this encounter. So, to set the scene, I was on a winter camping retreat with my church called Ice Camp, and we traveled to a place called Camp McHindo, located outside the town of Hillsdale, Michigan. The first night was pretty much uneventful, but we got to explore the campgrounds at night as well as get settled into our cabins. However, all the joy was taken away when we were told never to explore the campgrounds alone at night or the monsters would get us. But for a bunch of rowdy teenage boys, we just laughed it off and went to bed. The morning was uneventful, but one detail about where my cabin was, it was across a large lake with a relatively small footbridge connecting our cabin with the main lodge and all the other cabins. So in the main dining hall, one of the cabins mentioned how last night none of them got to sleep because something was howling in the woods near the section called the Western Town. And my cabin didn't believe them for 1 second. And we just told them that it was coyotes or wolves since there had been gray wolf sightings near the camp. However, the teens telling us this were shaken up and they were adamant about it was something else, and we joked that it was a Bigfoot. So they just told my cabin to shut the F up, and we did. Well, as the day progressed, my cabin and counselor had done activities to keep us interested. However, that evening would be the worst night of our lives. It was around midnight, and we set up a bonfire to sit around and reflect upon the sermon that was given. Shortly after that, we just began to talk about random stuff. And when we heard a bunch of coyotes, we thought nothing of it. But then it went dead quiet in a span of maybe a couple of minutes. Then we heard one of the most guttural howls that sounded like a human being murdered mixed with a wolf howl. This made us all jump up, but we wanted answers to what we heard. So my counselor, myself, and two other cabin mates entered the woods with a 200 lumen flashlight. We had good visibility at first. We didn't find anything. Then way off in the distance, a further area the flashlight could reach, we saw two pairs of red glowing eyes looking at us. And as it got closer, we thought we saw wolves. But the movement were unusual. It was more like a person down on all fours. My counselor told us to move away slowly, but the creature kept approaching. And before I could remember, the second one stood up and began to charge us, and we ran as fast as we could. We yelled to our cabin mates to get their butts to the cabin, and of course, they were confused as to why we were running until they heard the same howl as earlier, and we hauled our butts from the bonfire across the footbridge, and we stopped halfway because we thought it wouldn't get any closer until we heard the wood creaking rapidly, and my entire cabin broke it once again, this time up to my cabin, and we bolted the door shut. Whatever had followed us was now circling the cabin. All of us were freaking out, and then the thing looked into the window, and I got a good look at what it was. It had a humanoid body, muscular yet lanky at the same time. And the head wasn't like that of a Sasquatch. It was like that of a wolf. All night we heard scraping and heavy footsteps until early morning it lost interest and left. I went to get some breakfast early that morning, and to my horror, I found a large set of claw marks in the wood and a large set of footprints leading towards the woods. So after that howling encounter, I found out that the thing we saw was not Bigfoot, but rather an older cryptid from Michigan folklore called the Michigan Dogman. Now, ever since then, I refused to go to a sleepaway camp because whatever I saw, I knew it would still be roaming the campgrounds. So this next witness states, when I was 16, my life changed forever. I had broken my back in a bad accident and was bedridden for months, unable to move. The pain was excruciating, but the psychological toll was even worse. Being trapped in a hospital bed, staring at the same four walls day after day. But I was determined to recover and get my life back. Now, as soon as the doctors cleared me, I decided I need to get into nature to truly heal my mind and body. My mom agreed that the camping trip down in the beautiful Devon countryside might just be what I needed. She dropped me off at a remote forested area with my tent, some supplies, and a portable charger to keep my phone powered up. I had scoped out what looked like a perfect isolated spot to set up camp. Sure, it seemed to be on private land, but it was getting late and I didn't want to risk camping too close to a public area. I quickly pitched the tent as darkness fell, cracked open a cider, and fired up YouTube on my phone as I settled in to relax. That's when things took a turn for the sinister. I noticed my phone battery was draining faster than it should, even while charging. Strange, but I tried not to think too much about it. That's when I heard it. The unmistakable sound of heavy footsteps trampling through the underbrush, rapidly getting closer. My heart pounded. It sounded like at least 30 footfalls. Was it an aggressive hiker, or worse, a property owner with a shotgun? In a panic, I unzipped the tent and stuck my hands up and prepared to face whoever it was out there, but there was nothing. Just the eerie silence of the forest. The footsteps that had been nearly on top of me just seconds before simply faded into an unnatural nothingness. A deep sense of dread washed over me at that moment. Something was wrong here. I turned my head slowly, my gut telling me I wasn't alone. And that's when I saw it, barely 20 feet away, unmoving, yet undoubtedly alive. A massive skeletal beast about 5 foot tall, vaguely resembling a hairless, emaciated dog. Its blank face was frozen in the permanent bestial snarl, lips pulled back to expose rows of jagged teeth. I never felt such primal, wordless terror. Fight or flight didn't even enter into it. I instinctively scrambled backward into the tent and zipped it up, curling into a tight ball on the ground. My mind had simply shut down, overloaded by the sight of that thing. After whom knows how long, I somehow thought to check my phone in desperation. It was completely drained, so I frantically swapped in the portable charger. An agonizing 50 minutes later crawled by before it finally turned back in just 3% battery remaining. With shaking hands, I managed to text my mom a frantic plea for help, dropping my location pin and rearranged code phrase for an emergency extraction. The phone died again before she could respond. All I could do was hunker down in my sleeping bag and try not to imagine what sort of ungodly abomination was lurking just outside those thin nylon walls. The next few hours passed like a waking nightmare. Every minor sound, a snapping twig, a rustling bush, sent panic visions through my mind of that towering, bony creature closing in for the kill. Finally, I heard the blessed rumble of an engine in the distance. Risking a peek outside, I nearly collapsed with relief at the sight of my mom's car pulling up. I didn't even wait for the code response. I just grabbed my bag and sprinted straight for her open arms, leaving the tent and all the other belongings behind without a second thought. To this day, I have no rational explanation for what I encountered out in those woods. Maybe it was a delirious hallucination or a vivid waking dream brought on by stress and fatigue. Maybe it's just an unfortunate trick of light and shadow playing on my already frayed nerves. All I know is that I have never felt such abject primal terror before or since. My body was robbed of all ability for rational thought or action. Only the most basic instincts of self preservation remain. I'm not generally someone who believes in the supernatural, but that day in Devon will eternally be burned into my psyche as an omen, a warning from the universe that some places are better left undisturbed by human trespassers. If I had pressed on with my ill-fated camping excursion, I shudder to think what other shadowed monstrosities might have surfaced from the murky depths of the ancient woodland. Now, this next account, the witness states, my husband, son, and I went camping in rural West Virginia, kind of traveling around other parts of the state we don't get to see too often. We live in the Eastern Panhandle, but the places we camped were in Grant and Hardy County, Pendleton County, and Lost River area, and Spruce Knob, closer to the middle of the state. We camped Friday through Monday and had no cell service the whole time. Anyway, on our second night, we set up at Spruce Knob in Monongahela National Forest. It's not a campsite, it's a fire ring we found on a good hike from a long, quiet, sparsely populated country road. So not seriously backpacking, but not populated by any means. People occasionally drive up to see the overlook, but after sunset, we generally hear no cars and cannot see or hear evidence of others camping nearby, not even a distant fire. We got into our tent around 9 or 10 p.m. About 30 minutes later, my husband describes his primal, overwhelming fear, sense that something is off. So he's wide awake, and so is our son. The tent flap rain cover moved and made an odd but quiet rustle, and then suddenly we saw a human-like figure standing right next to our tent, like close, a silhouette. An imposing stance and tall, like staring into the dark tent, looking down at us inside. It just appeared. There were no sounds like a bear or person would make approaching the tent, except for the possibility that the wind blowing over our rain cover, which was very quiet and odd sounding, not someone walking up. My husband yells, hey, hey, etc., and clapped and made noise, maybe because it was a bear, and his first thought was to scare it off. It wasn't moving around. It was very still, not swaying with the pretty non-existent gentle wind, like a tree moving or how the eye's trick would appear, but it just standing, hovering there. It hung around a few more seconds after my husband made noise, and then it just kind of evaporated or vanished. Still no sound. Like a good horror movie. We got out and looked around with a flashlight, still yelling, clapping, and looking around. He found no disturbance, no tracks, no rustling, or any noise, just simply gone. Now, I know this may sound based some trick of the eye. We always feel very safe in these woods and know them well. So his having this fear response immediately before seeing this or hearing the rain flap is unusual. He doesn't get creeped out for no reason. We're built with instincts, so they should be trusted. Also, based on what the moon was, waning crescent, it offered very little light, not enough to create a silhouette. Our campfire was out, plus the apparition was close to the woods on the backside of the tents. So even if our campfire was going, the angle would have been wrong to create an illusion. It's bothering us because there's no good explanation. I want to reiterate that we never got bad vibes while camping like this. We're experienced in the woods, and I'm always warned. I do wish we'd snapped a pic or something, but panicking about a bear, scary axe murderer, ghost, whatever, taking a pic just didn't cross our minds. It was all too quick anyway. It felt like forever, but this was probably only a good 60 to 90 seconds. So, Mothman, has anyone had anything similar happen? We may be going back next weekend because other than our visitor, we had so much fun, and it was a lovely camp spot. or will we be pushing our luck? I want to write this out while the details are still fresh. They never got back to me, but I wish I knew what they ran across. This next witness states, in the summer of 2009, my husband and I went camping in the Unicoi State Park in Georgia. One morning around 4 a.m., I woke up to go to the restroom. There was a building near the campsite provided restroom and shower facilities. It was pitch black outside except for the light from my lantern and the lights from the building. I went in, did my thing, and as I started to leave to walk back to my tent, I stopped walking. I had a feeling someone was behind me. I turned around and I saw 3 figures standing in the woods behind the building, near our campsite on the hill in the back. They didn't seem to be doing anything but standing there. I thought it could have been people from the campground on the hill, but why would they be standing in the middle of the woods at 4 a.m. for no apparent reason? When one of them turned and looked at me, I realized they weren't human. For one thing, the arms were too long and the bodies were too thin. The skin had pale, glossy look, and they had very large craniums with lumps all over the top of the scalp. They had huge black eyes that seemed to pierce right through me. I stand 5'3", and they looked about 2 inches shorter than me. The one that saw me started to inch towards me, but I bolted back to my tent. When my husband asked me what was wrong, all I could say was, there are freaking aliens back there. When he finally calmed me down, he had me stay in the tent while he went to see what it was. He found nothing. I don't know if I had any missing time or not. It was around 5 a.m. when I finally calmed enough to leave the tent with my husband. We had a cigarette and talked about my sighting. Then around 6:30 a.m., we got a fire going and cooked breakfast, and that's all I remember from that morning. The next night, he said he saw a shadowy figure moving outside. We didn't hear any footsteps. We looked up and saw the top cover on the tent move as if someone pulled it aside to look at us from above. When we woke up again later that night, the blankets on his side of the tent were wet. And it started raining that night. My side was dry for the most part. I couldn't remember exactly which campsite we used, but I'm sure it was lot 60. It was located directly across in the parking lot. Now, I didn't see any signs of a craft nearby, but I did see the creatures. Now, I know what I saw was real, and I was wide awake when I saw them. Next witness states, hello, sir. I came across one of your reports concerning black-eyed kids in Pennsylvania. My cousin and I had a very weird experience in September 2011. We both lived in the town of Wolverine, Michigan, and our dads are brothers. My cousin and I have been hunting and camping together since we were 12 years old, and we're only 2 months apart in age. We had graduated from high school that spring and planned to go camping later in the summer. We finally got permission to use my dad's pop-up camper and headed off. We planned to stay a week or so at a place southwest of Mackinac City in a forest near the state park. We drove back into the woods about 4 miles off the main road and set up in a small clearing. We both thought the area looked familiar, but could not recall when we had been there. It was weird because we both commented at the same time to each other. We really didn't have much plan to do other than be together and hike the area. Both of us were going to move away from home the next spring, so we didn't know when we'd see each other again. And I'll be honest, the camping trip was a good excuse to get away from my girlfriend for a while. We didn't do much that first night other than drink a few beers and talk, and we were in our racks early that night. The next morning, we decided to explore the area. We started at about 10 a.m. and headed west towards the lake. And we had been walking no more than an hour when we heard somebody yelling ahead of us. It didn't sound like they were in trouble, so we cautiously continued walking toward the sound. After about 10 minutes or so, the yelling stopped and we never saw anyone. I had a GPS with me, so I figured we'd be able to find our way back easily. Now, we did get crossed up a few times, but we got back to the campsite late afternoon. There was a small creek nearby, so we washed up and started cooking dinner. Now, as we sat to eat, there was a sound of something moving through the trees north of us. There were a lot of small animals in the area, so I figured that's what it was. A few minutes later, we heard thrashing sounds like something was sweeping at small trees and bushes. Since we were eating, I thought maybe a black bear got wind of our food. Whatever it was, it soon stopped, but occasionally it would start up again. That night, we could hear the sweeping sound coming from the same area, which seemed odd to us. The next morning, it was quiet, so we walked in the direction of the noise from the previous night. We didn't see anything, but it did look like something had been kicking up the ground in a few places. We walked back to the campsite and started to eat breakfast. I just wanted coffee, so I went into the pop up and searched for a coffee cup. As I was in there, I heard my cousin say something. I asked what he wanted. He replied that I had better get out there. I looked through the netting, and there was a tall man with a black tracksuit standing at the edge of the clearing. I stepped out and asked the man if we could help him. He smiled and said, "Maybe I can help you." My cousin and I both looked at each other and kind of laughed. The man started to slowly walk towards us, and I asked what he wanted. He stopped walking and was about 15 foot from us. Right away, I noticed that his eyes were totally black and that the tracksuit had caked mud and dirt on it. I asked who he was. He smiled and said, "I'm just taking a walk and meeting people." By this time, I was freaked out, and my cousin walked towards the pop up. I knew he was going to grab his shotgun. The man got a serious look on his face like he sensed we were alarmed, so he turned and walked towards the woods. At the edge of the clearing, he stopped, turned around, and said, "I'll be seeing you boys later," and started to laugh as he moved towards the woods. We didn't need another confrontation like that, so we gathered everything and hauled ourselves out of there. We set up in another area about 70 miles south of there, and we had an enjoyable couple of days. But when we get together, we still wonder aloud who the weird black-eyed man was. So this next witness states, I grew up in a very outdoorsy family in southern Indiana, and we often went camping and hiking in the summer. My mother told this story to my sister and me about a time she had went camping with my dad before we were born. She said, I was in my tent and it was in the middle of the night, perhaps 1 a.m., and I had woken up to go relieve myself just like normal. I was about to unzip the tent when I heard a small scratching sound. I paused. It was a slow, deliberate, crunching, digging kind of sound. It was too rhythmic for an animal. So after making sure it wasn't your father who was sharing the tent, I unzipped the corner of the door and peeked out. The moon was just bright enough for me to see a young woman squatting right next to our little two-man tent, digging at the ground with her bare hands. Even your father was scared. So he went and shined a flashlight on her and told her to go back to wherever she had made camp. The woman got up silently, leaving a 4-inch deep hole next to the tent, and started walking away. I went outside, relieved myself, and got back into my sleeping bag. A few minutes later, I was awoken again by a clattering sound of a person or animal walking around where we had put our stuff. I looked outside again, and the woman was crouched low, walking around her stuff and looking at things the way a monkey might. Your father stepped out of the tent, shined the flashlight on her again, and she faced him. He asked her to kindly leave their stuff alone, but she just stood there, dirty and neglected looking, but not malnourished, staring at his light. He gave up and went back into our tent. Soon we heard her digging again at her little hole, which was literally 6 inches and 2 pieces of thin nylon away from my head. I shouted for her to go away, and she ran away in an animalistic way and never returned. I fell back asleep, and in the morning, our stuff was scattered, but nothing was stolen. My mother and father never did find out who the woman was. My mother believed that she may have been a feral. They did report the incident to the local police the next day, but they were never contacted afterward. So, this next account, the witness tells me, "Hi, Lon. I don't have any idea what I witnessed in May 28th, 2013, but it was the most frightening experience in my life. My wife and I were camping at an RV park near Jasper, Arkansas, and planned to be there for several days. We arrived early Saturday and got situated soon after. Now, my wife wanted to look around the area since she had never been to the Ozarks. I was born and raised in the mountains and was familiar with the terrain and wildlife. After we tinkered around the campsite, we decided to take a short hike through the nearby valley. There were a few caves and caverns along the way, but nothing where I would have guessed any large predator would live. After walking for an hour, we started to head back towards the RV park. Now, not long after we started walking back down the trail, something caught my eye on the right in a sassafras thicket. My wife sensed it as well and stopped to look in the same direction. I could see this dark four-legged creature moving back and forth slowly through the brush. We immediately started to walk at a fast pace towards the park. This creature was moving along as well, keeping its distance, but tracking us. This continued for what seemed like 10 minutes until we reached the clearing. We got back to the campsite very shaken and nervous. All my years growing up the mountains, I had never seen anything comparable to it. From what I could gather, it was very large, almost the size of a black bear, but moved close to the ground like a cat. It was also very dark in color. We didn't say anything to the other campers nearby. Now, the rest of the evening was very quiet and peaceful until around 2:15 a.m., when we heard what sounded like a high-pitched howl coming from a distance. It was loud enough to wake both of us, and I noticed several campers were looking outside, milling around, and talking as well. Someone said it was just a coyote, but that was not a coyote or anything else that what I had heard before. The next morning, we woke up around 9 a.m. When I stepped out of the RV, a woman walked up to me and asked if I had heard the howling. I said that I did and had no idea what it was. The woman who was camping nearby said she believed it would be the Ozark howler and that there had been a few sightings recently. I knew the stories about the Ozark howler, but never believed any of them. Well, my wife wanted to leave as soon as possible. Now, I'm not sure what to think. We came home today and I looked up the Ozark howler. There isn't much to go on, and I read your blog and thought you may want to get the word out. Is it possible this creature may live? Now, information on the Ozark howlers, the howler is pretty scant, as well as the history is pretty vague as well. A lot of anecdotal accounts, but nothing to really hang your hat on. But I have had a few reports over the years, so I don't know what people have seen. So an eyewitness contacted me after finding a cryptid canine report that I posted from Michigan State Forest here in Pennsylvania, not far from me. The location, Dead Woman Hollow, is well known for its creepiness. So I received the following account. Hi, Lon. I recently found your post about the Dogman encounter in Dead Woman Hollow. I thought that I would contact you about the creepy experience I had there. It happened about 8 years ago in Michigan State Forest in south central Pennsylvania. It was a charming fall day, and I stopped at a little roadside pull-off for a hike, which turned out to be Dead Woman Hollow, a snowmobile trail that intersects with the Appalachian Trail, I think. I set off walking. And I was so relaxed and enjoyed the hike until I turned around and started back. As I was walking back, I got this awful feeling that I was being watched and even pursued. At some point, I felt what seemed to be a handful of smallish rocks hitting the back of my leg, and I turned around expecting to see a couple of dudes being funny, teasing a lady, me, alone on the trail. But there was no one there. I brushed it off, but feeling of being watched increased until it was all I could do not to break into a run. Now, I made it back to the car fine, but the feeling I experienced at Dead Woman's Hollow shook me. Of course, I later Googled Dead Woman's Hollow and found out about the horrible murder and shooting that happened there in the 80s. I honestly wonder if I had been picking up on that incident somehow. I'm not psychic or anything at all, though. Over the years, though, I must admit, I've wondered about Sasquatch as rock throwing and feelings of being watched or associated with sightings. Anyway, Dead Woman's Hollow can get creepy. Well, the post that the witness referred to that I had on my blog was the following post. Hello, Lon. I came across your site and listened to the episode about the need for people to submit information for your investigations. Let me start by saying I have no desire to experience an anomaly, but for whatever reason, I seem to draw them, much to my dismay. This is the first time I have spoken to anyone outside of my family, so here's my encounter. It was at Michigan State Forest in Cumberland County in Dead Woman Hollow. It was the last weekend of August in 2015. My husband and I began sitting around a fire pit at my sister's cabin shortly before dusk. There was no one else present the entire time. As always, we were both armed. We always had a spotlight and were about 20 feet from the front door of the cabin. We had been avid outdoor people all our lives, with many, many hours hunting various wildlife, trapping, fishing, camping, canoeing, and hiking. My husband began playing around, yelling weird sounds to get a reaction out of me because I was nervous for the first time out of all the times I'd ever been there for some reason. Now, to our surprise, something answered him from what I'd say about 100 yards away through the woods with the same sounds that he was making. He stopped, and we sat silently looking and listening for what it was. No more joking around. The yells, probably 5 in total, came closer over a few hours until the last one heard was clearly within 40 yards of us. It was like that I decided to go in. It was that when I decided to go inside. I had been shining the spotlight intermittently through the evening into the woods and thought I would do so one last time as we both walked towards the cabin. That's when I saw something for the first time, yellow eyes. It did not look away or blink, but remained staring back at me from an area where the last yell had come from. I tried to see its body, but everything else was dark around it. When I said, "I see eye shine" to my husband, the eyes moved several feet sideways, staring at me the whole time, then disappeared completely. I have spotlighted deer and various animals, and this was not the same. They were at least twice the size of a deer's eyes, and there was no indication it had turned its head or walked away, but instead gave the impression of stepping behind something. Once inside the cabin, we retired for the night with the bed having been positioned directly under a window that was left open for ventilation. My husband slept undisturbed throughout the night. I, however, heard what sounded like wood chopping 6 different times. I heard a loud crack close by also. So the next morning, I walked to the area of the last vocalization I shined down a path. I found the biggest tree in the area about 5 foot off the path. It was too big to put my arms around. I noticed a clear line from the tree to the path of the disturbed leaves as if something walked to the tree and then returned the same way. None of the other leaves around were disturbed except the line continuing around the path in the opposite direction into the thick cover. I also found a freshly broken tree limb about 10 inches diameter, about 4 foot long, lying in the path, all of this within 10 square feet. It appeared to have come from a live tree nearby and had been broken off several feet above my head. I had every intention of investigating the scene even more, but frankly, I lost my wit, which is not like me, and returned to the fire pit to tidy up. I knew all this was abnormal and didn't feel right. That's when the most frightening thing happened. My attention was brought back to the big tree by loud sounds of something big moving fast toward me from the cover where the line of disturbed leaves was. I saw the foliage move closer as I ran into the cabin. I'm sure I couldn't have been but a second or two from seeing it burst out into plain view, which is exactly what I did not want. So, what I would like to know is what mimics humans' voices or people's voices, has large eyes that shine yellow at night, hides behind big trees, makes wood chopping sounds, break big limbs off like live trees, and charges at people in broad daylight. Thank you for your time and consideration of this email. I hope you find it helpful, the helpful information somehow. So, where do I start? Well, this area has the Appalachian Trail traversing through it, and there was a murder there, Dead Woman Hollow. Rebecca Witt, but it got its name from the fact that a woman whose identity is no longer known was bitten by a snake and had died there many, many years ago. After she was found, the natives referred to the area and the road as Dead Woman Hollow. There was also a crime or horror movie, which was fiction, made about the location called Dead Woman Hollow that was made in 2013. Anyway, the witness most likely had a run-in with a Bigfoot, which has been reported throughout Michigan State Forest. But then again, I'm not going to discount the fact that bipedal canines have been seen in Cumberland County, and Michigan State Forest would be an excellent habitat for them. And as well, the yellow eyes are indicative of a canine or a feline. So, folks, that's it. Yeah, any questions, put them in all caps and put them up there, and we'll try to answer. Any questions, any comments, anything anybody wants to say? Yeah, good crowd in here tonight. Almost 100 people right now. And if you did make a donation, I really appreciate it. I just didn't see any flashing up there. Real truth. Is there a countdown yet for the PM site? Yeah, I talked to them today. They're still working on it. They've got the landing page done. It took a while because there were some issues with the coding. But I'm thinking about 2 weeks. So, these things take time, especially when you're working with a busy developer and creator, and they got other jobs going on. So I had to wait until they could actually spend more time with it. But I'd say about 2 weeks. But it will be back. Dagnammit, do you have any cryptid stories from Yellowstone National Park? Yeah, I may. I don't know. I had to look in the archives. I think there was a Bigfoot story that I had from there a while back. Barbara Mora, have you ever had an account of BEK adults? You mean myself? No, I've never had that. I've had a lot of accounts, but I never had an encounter or anything like that before. I had no idea what those things are. I personally believe they're possessed beings, but who knows? I mean, they had the black-eyed kids, and as years going by, we got the black-eyed adults. So are they growing up? I don't know. Hard to tell. Paranormalism Net. Does cryptid activity increase after extreme weather events like tornadoes, hurricanes, and flooding? Um, yeah, it does. In some cases, the whole Sykesville monster thing, which is interesting. The theory about that when it started up back in 1972 was for those who live on the East Coast to remember the Agnes floods in Pennsylvania, Maryland, and Mid-Atlantic. They believe that pushed the Bigfoot out in the open for some reason, but those sightings were right after the Agnes, the tropical storm Agnes flooding. Philip Blair was the Devon report from over in England. Yeah, that was in Devonshire. Jose Sanchez, have any Dogman or Bigfoots been seen in actual cities? I have a Dogman report or a cryptid canine report in New York City from around the turn of the century. Also, I have had reports of several Bigfoot being seen in towns, but those are older reports. And towns that weren't that populated. As far as a Bigfoot in a city, I don't know. I don't think I've ever had one of those. Anything else, folks? Okay. Well, I want to thank each and all of you for watching and chatting. If you donated, it's truly appreciated. Your support's what makes this possible. So please like, subscribe, and share. Now, if you had a sighting or encounter report that you'd like to be considered for the personal report show or post on the Phantoms and Monsters blog site when I finally get it up, feel free to forward to my email at lonstricklerphantomsandmonsters.com. So until we meet again, stay healthy, stay safe, have a great weekend, and good night. Talk to you later.